When someone describes someone as a nerd, you may think of someone who looks and resembles this. In reality, today a nerd may look a little bit more like this. But how have these changes happened? Why is it that society has gone from bullying these misfits to idolizing them? Within the span of around 20 to 25 years, nerd culture has been embraced. It's no longer discriminated against. But in order to understand how it is that we got here, we need to go way back to the beginning. To start off with, we should look at the Google Dictionary definition of a nerd. Google states that it can be used as both a verb and a noun. It says that a nerd is anyone who is extremely enthusiastic and knowledgeable about a particular subject, especially one of a specialist or niche interest. Or someone who engages in or might be discussing a technical field obsessively or with great attention to detail. The term nerd comes from a Dr. Seuss book called If I Run a Zoo, released in 1950, and by the early 60s it was being used to describe a very bookish, socially awkward person, but it wasn't until the 70s when the term started being used widely after the release of the show Happy Days.
To the tricuspid valve, to the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery and lungs.
The 1950s to the 1980s. This is a period of history where your stereotypical nerd was found. You can find many movies and other forms of media depicting nerds as these guys who lack any form of physical abilities. They are very smart, yet they are depicted to have their own little quirks and are always dressed in a way to make them stand out. Movies like Desk Set, released in 1957, The Nutty Professor from 1963, and Revenge of the Nerds, whose book was written in 1978 and the movie released in 1984, all portray nerds as these socially unable characters who are all really smart about one topic, and that's about it. This is also the period in which video games started to be created. 1958, Tennis for Two, was considered to be the first ever game. However, everyone who was playing this game was seen to be a geek, because in order to play this game, you had to visit a laboratory, as the only computer in the world with the game on it was in a lab. This is because William Higginbotham, who was a physicist, would come to invent this game, meaning that gaming, at least for the near future, was seen to be quite the nerdy passion. This game, which proved to serve as a tech demo, showcasing the potential abilities of a computer. However, this did lead to gaming being strongly connected to science and intelligence, which led to gaming being considered a highly nerdy activity for quite a while. Which brings us to the 80s. The last decade showed us the first Comic-Con, and in the next couple of years comics would become so heavily connected with nerd culture, alongside the release of movies like Star Wars: A New Hope from 1977, Terminator 1984, and more. These were always considered to be quite nerdy films, with all of them being sci-fis and most of them appealing towards these comic book readers who are into superheroes, computers, and that type of stuff. However, this increase of sci-fi movies also had an impact outside of creating a culture that people look down on. Many of these movies performed really well, with franchises like Star Wars being considered to be the favourite franchise movies of many people, both back then and today. While many people still saw showing up to a Comic-Con in a homemade costume of Stormtrooper as quite geeky and odd, telling your mates that your favourite movie is Ghostbuster was becoming an increasingly more acceptable thing. During the 80s, the biggest advancement was definitely in the gaming industry. Nintendo, an old card games brand, had hopped on the gaming industry, and in the 80s they released many of the popular consoles from before the era of the console wars. These include the NES or the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sega Master, and the Atari 7800. When I discussed this topic at home, I found out that both of my parents' first gaming experience was on a Nintendo Entertainment System released in 1983. This system brought many of the popular arcade games to your home via a console which you plugged into your TV, and many new titles which became increasingly famous, including the Super Mario Bros. Series and Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link. The introduction of gaming into the everyday household helped distance the idea of playing computer games from being a nerdy activity into one that was sufficiently more mainstream, which is seen through the 61.9 million sales of the Nintendo Entertainment System, with the original Super Mario Bros. Being the most sold NES game with an amazing and massive 40 million copies, which was just insane back then. 1990 to 2017. What a time to be alive. It's a very interesting time period. Nerds are becoming more and more accepted, with lots of adults and much more children just embracing nerd culture. By the time this period was ending, nerd culture had basically become culture. It was what we were used to. It's alright to go watch a Marvel movie. And that's kind of a problem as well, because this culture was never meant to be popular, yet as time went on, it became popular. Steve Jobs, one of the many successful and famous nerds, released the iPhone in 2007. All of a sudden, every single person is walking around with a tiny pocket-sized computer. This device 20 years earlier would have gotten you bullied, people would have made fun of you for making this. They're like, oh my god, what a nerd, spending his time building a computer. But now, everyone has it, it became essential. And let's not forget the creation of some amazing shows, such as The Big Bang Theory, which, although they somewhat portray nerds in a somewhat negative fashion, the creation of a show whose main characters were all nerds. It made people relate. A lot of people started to relate with these guys.
We put Amy on a dating app and we're seeing what's out there.
Oh, fun. Let me see. No, definitely not.
And they started including them because they realized they weren't all so different. This time period also saw the start of streaming, content creation. In 2005, YouTube, probably the biggest social media platform of all time, was made. This platform allowed for people to upload videos onto the internet, and the creation of YouTube, in my opinion, was the second most important moment in the future of nerd culture and mainstream media, with the most being the game Fortnite. Because in my opinion, Fortnite, that just made nerd culture. By the time that released, nerd culture was culture. And I'll get back to that later. And through YouTube, people were able to talk about their passions. Many popular creators today who would have been seen as nerds were now just seen as creators. Think of tech channels, such as those run by Mr. Who's the Boss or Linus Tech Tips. That's the definition of a nerdy channel. Some guy whose quirk is computers. Yet, this is acceptable. And now it's becoming a popular career option. Furthermore, 2008, this brought Marvel into the stream.
Good God, you're a woman. Is it better to be feared?
The MCU would grow to become the most recognizable movie franchise across the world. Iron Man, the first MCU movie, was a massive success. Spider-Man, his silk is made in a lab. He's a genius. He's a superhero. He likes Star Wars as well, if you see the movies,
Me and together, we'll build my new Lego Death Star.
What?
So lame.
No way, that's awesome. How many pieces?
3,803.
He is a nerd. There is no debating that. And that's acceptable today. 2017, specifically July of 2017, is one of the most important parts. In my opinion, it's the final nail in the coffin as to the end of nerd culture and the implementation of it becoming mainstream. You see, the game Fortnite brought what is now known as esports to the common world. If we go back 30 years, we see gaming as this niche activity. 20 years ago, it was, something you did to pass the time. 5 years, your parents called it a distraction from your schoolwork. But now, all of a sudden, it was a job. Think about it. You can make money from playing video games.
Ladies and gentlemen, this cup is yours. One more time, your world champion, Brunolag!
A nerdy activity was a job. Wow. Just wow. Now, all of a sudden, with the rise of esports, we had events like the Fortnite World Cup in July of 2019, which today is still the most evented LAN event of all time. And gamers started to be respected, accepted even. And it was slowly embraced into society, with many kids wanting to become Twitch streamers instead of doctors. Present day. Nerds, they're accepted. I mean, the PC Master Race, it's a massive thing today. Everyone has a computer, everyone has a console of some sorts, and if you don't, you most likely have a phone or a laptop. Every single person in the school has a laptop in year 5 onwards, because, you kind of need it to do your work. So you need, a nerd to help you fix it when it gets broken. That's why we have our IT department. Everyone's playing games and stuff. Games were thought to be a nerdy activity. Well, not anymore. Now it's just something that you do. Hop on with the boys, crank some 90s in Fortnite. Do what it is you do. But most likely, it would not be able to be done without a nerd helping you out in some way or form. And that brings us to today, where I am presenting to you a short video essay on nerd culture, knowing fully well that my intense passion for gaming, computers and Star Wars makes me a nerd. So in reality, this is a video about how nerds evolved from this guy who was not accepted into me, into a lot of us. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.